Last time, people from Jerusalem and all over Palestine came to where John was living and preaching in an uninhabited area by the Jordan River. He was preparing the way for the coming Messiah by pointing out people's sin and their true standing before God. Many accepted his message, repented, and were baptized by John. A notable exception were the religious elite, and John was brutally honest in exposing their hypocrisy. After Jesus was baptized by John, God's Spirit came to him, demonstrating that he was to be the dominant guiding force in Jesus' life and ministry. God declared that Jesus is his Son and that he is entirely pleased with him. Matthew's account in chapter 4, verses 1 to 11, now moves on to another amazing incident from Jesus' life that reveals a great deal about who he is and who God is. After his baptism, Jesus is directed by God's Spirit to go off on his own into an uninhabited area. After 40 days, that's nearly 6 weeks, without food there, he's naturally very hungry. This is in Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 2. No doubt, hoping Jesus will be made spiritually vulnerable through physical weakness, Satan takes the opportunity to try to lure him into saying or doing something that is against God's will. Actually, Matthew uses the other common name for this fallen, powerful spirit being, the devil. The special relationship between the Father and Son that God has recently testified to on the bank of the Jordan River is going to be put to the test. We're reminded of another such test, of a man's willingness for God to be his absolute guide rather than himself. In that case, of course, Adam failed and the results for the human race were catastrophic. What will happen now? The stakes are just as high as they were then, in fact, more so. If Jesus falls for Satan's deception, if in any way he resists God's guiding hand, or if he fails to live up to God's perfection, the entire plan to rescue the human race will fail. Like Adam, he will have given allegiance to God's enemy. Only a perfect man can be God's special chosen prophet, priest, and king. Mankind will be lost, forever slaves to Satan, to sin, and to death. So now comes the first test. Jesus is hungry and alone in the wilderness, at least in terms of human companions. We don't know in what form exactly, but Satan begins to communicate with him. Not only do we learn about God's character in this encounter, but we also gain insights into how his enemy works. He prods and pushes in subtle, devious ways, looking for points of vulnerability to twist and destroy. Clearly, he would love nothing more than to drive a wedge between the Son and his Father. He starts out with something seemingly benign, neutral, food. This is in Matthew chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Jesus is obviously very hungry. Well, there's nothing wrong with food, is there? As the Son of the Creator, it would certainly be easy to turn some of these stones lying around into bread. Where's the harm in that? Surely God wouldn't be unreasonable enough to not want his Son to eat. But Jesus sees the rotten core at the heart of this suggestion from Satan. There are more important things at stake here than his hunger, his needs. He won't be tempted to use his creative power to fulfill his own desires, no matter how real they are. Certainly he won't be guided by God's enemy. He quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, where Moses recalls how God took the Israelites into the wilderness for 40 years. One of the important lessons they were supposed to learn there was that life is not ultimately sustained by food. Physical needs are transient, secondary. The important thing is truth. It is allowing God to be our story writer and teller, to put his will above our own concerns. That is the purpose and the essence of life. Now we come to the second test. This is in Matthew chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Satan insidiously brings into question how much God, the Father, really cares for his Son, and whether Jesus will manipulate God to find out. Okay, say you're standing at the highest point of the temple in Jerusalem, and there they are, Jesus and Satan, on a ledge or rooftop, looking down into the void. Then, with incredible insolence, Satan quotes God's word from Psalm chapter 91, verses 11 and 12. He quotes it to Jesus, but typically he tries to make it serve his own devious purposes. God says he'll protect people who trust him for refuge, even sending his angels to make sure they don't come to harm, right? Well, then Satan implies, given this special relationship you're supposed to have as his son, what have you got to worry about? Go ahead, jump. Find out if God really does care for you. See if the relationship is what God says it is. But Jesus is having none of it. His confidence in God's care and faithfulness is rock solid. He has no intention of trying to force the Father to prove it. He quotes again from Moses' review of the Israelites' 40 years in the wilderness, when they demanded that God provide water for them. It's wrong to put God to the test like that, to try to dictate what he does. The mantra of many people in modern society is that they'd believe in God if he'd do this or that, but they insist on setting the terms for belief in him. This is a reversal of the order of things. He is God. He's the one who sets the terms. He reveals himself to us in the ways that he knows are best. Humans are in no position to force God's hand. The only appropriate posture is one of humble dependence and trust. And Jesus, the sinless Son of God, himself the creator of all things, chooses to take that very posture. This is in Matthew chapter 4, verse 7. Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God." So we come to test 3. Satan plays his final card. This is in Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. They're standing together looking out at all the earth's kingdoms, the thrones and empires, the sum total of human power and glory, perhaps for all of history. Satan, the great usurper, the counterfeit ruler of earth since man's fall, offers it to Jesus. He can have it all right now. All the power, all the adulation. Even be a benevolent, humane ruler if he chooses. He could do some good. And best of all, there's no cost, no sacrifice, no pain. What was it again that God is offering? Being a sacrificial lamb? Saving people from their sin? No. There's an easier road than that. Much less extreme, more reasonable and realistic in a human sense. And only one small requirement. All he has to do is kneel down and worship Satan. What harm can there be in that? But Jesus is dismissive. He's had enough. He's not seduced by the power without sacrifice, the authority without cost that Satan offers. That's not the road he's on, not what he came to earth for. He concludes the conversation, this is in Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, with a curt dismissal of Satan and one final quote from the same part of the Old Testament narrative as before. This is in Deuteronomy 6, verse 13. You must worship the Lord your God and serve only him. This, of course, is what Satan rebelled against, wanting for himself the worship and servitude of everyone else. It's also what Adam and all his race failed to do, preferring on the whole to tell their own story and serve themselves first. But putting God first and serving only him is what Jesus has chosen to do, no matter what the cost. And this is the very thing that qualifies him and only him to be God's Lamb, to save people from their sins, to be the great deliverer of mankind. God's battle with his enemy, Satan, the battle with evil, in fact, is not a struggle for supremacy between two well-matched opponents, nor is it anything like the dualism of some religions, two sides that make up a whole, light and darkness, good and evil. Satan's power is real enough. As humans, we are no match for his cunning, but God is in no way threatened by him. His supremacy is never in doubt. He writes the story of reality from beginning to end, including, ultimately, Satan's destiny. Matthew's narrative records that Satan leaves. Jesus has triumphed. His weapons have been truth, faith, and obedience to God. A final intriguing footnote from Matthew adds that God's messengers, his angels, come and take care of Jesus.